Russia is one of the world's biggest oil exporters. And yet, in parts of Russia, people are standing in line for gasoline. Farmers worry whether they'll have enough diesel to bring in the next harvest. Drivers arrive at gas stations with canisters trying to buy fuel before the pumps run dry tomorrow. Even the canisters themselves are becoming harder to find because everyone suddenly wants one. So here's the question. How does an oil superpower run short on fuel? The answer is simple on the surface and brutal underneath. Oil in the ground is not gasoline in the tank. Between the Siberian well and the Russian driver, between the refinery and the Russian army, there is a long chain of pipelines, refineries, railways, depots, trucks, spare parts, software, subsidies, and political decisions. Ukraine has learned where that chain is weakest, and sanctions have made it much harder for Russia to repair what breaks. I'm Elvira Bari, a writer born in the Soviet Union, and today we will look at what caused Russia's fuel crisis, how the country is trying to manage it, and what may happen if this continues. Here's our roadmap. The oil inheritance, how Russia became rich on oil and why that wealth always depended on more than oil itself. Russia's fuel machine, who refines, distributes, sells, and transports fuel across the country. Ukraine's refinery war, why Ukraine is targeting refineries, depots, and fuel logistics. The repair trap, why Russia cannot quickly restore everything under sanctions. The regional seizure, why some regions suffer faster and harder than others. The army problem, how fuel disruption reaches the front. The 6-month window, what happens if this pressure keeps building. If you'd like to keep getting this kind of insight, please subscribe, like, share, join my think tank, support through PayPal or Super Thanks, or tap Hype Points. That is how this channel stays independent and keeps doing deeper analysis. And if you are listening on Spotify, follow the show so the next episode lands in your feed automatically. Before we go any further, I want to ask for your help. Here is the situation. I wrote a novel about drone warfare in Ukraine and about how the Russian elites actually operate. This book is the result of an enormous number of interviews with very different people, from soldiers in the Ukrainian army to top managers in Moscow. Naturally, I couldn't publish such a book through Russian publishing houses. What is happening there now is a genuine cultural pogrom. People are being persecuted not even for political thrillers, but for harmless summer novels about gay love. So I published The Snow Queen's Spring in Russian on my website. 2 weeks later, the Russian Ministry of Justice officially declared me a foreign agent. In other words, an enemy of the Putin state. That should give you some idea of how quickly they reacted. Now, the book is spreading like wildfire by word of mouth. I can see it in my website statistics. At any given moment, hundreds of people are there reading it. And I am receiving a huge number of grateful messages from Ukrainians. The novel has already been translated into English, and now I need to find publishers in the United States and Europe. I need this because I want to provoke Putin's officials even more. If the book is published by a prestigious Western house, they will panic, denounce it loudly, and begin attacking it. That, in turn, will arouse curiosity, and I will have a chance to talk about my understanding of the war in Ukraine and about responsibility, guilt, and a possible way out. I cannot break into the publishing world from the street. No one replies to me. I understand why. Major publishers receive hundreds of submissions a day, and I cannot ask my former Russian publishers for help either. For them, any contact with me is unsafe. So, If you have connections to respected publishing houses, editors, or literally agents who work with geopolitical thrillers, please put me in touch with them. You can read the opening of the book on my website, elverabari.com, to judge the quality for yourself. Putinism will not bring itself down. Something has to change in people's minds. And that is exactly what books and films are for. Now, let us return to our video. The oil inheritance. Long before the Soviet Union existed, the Russian Empire was already developing oil fields in the Caucasus, especially around Baku on the Caspian Sea. At first, oil was not about cars. It was used for kerosene lamps, machine lubricants, industry, and shipping. Russia had oil in the ground, but it lacked much of the capital, technology, transport infrastructure, and industrial expertise needed to turn that oil into a global business. So from the beginning, Russian oil power had a contradiction inside it. The resource was domestic, but the technology and know-how came from outside. After the Bolshevik Revolution, the oil industry was nationalized and folded into the Soviet-planned economy. During World War II, the Soviet Union relied heavily on domestic oil, especially from the Caucasus and Baku. But it still depended on allies for crucial supplies. Lend-Lease provided aviation fuel, trucks, locomotives, railway cars, industrial equipment, and other materials that helped the Soviet system move, fight, and recover. So again, we see the same pattern. Russia had raw resources, but under extreme pressure, it needed outside technology, machinery, and logistics support. After the war, the discovery and development of Western Siberian oil and gas changed Soviet history. Europe needed cheap energy. The Soviet Union supplied it. Hydrocarbon exports brought in hard currency, machinery, grain, and technology. In simple terms, oil allowed the Soviet Union to keep pretending that its economic model worked better than it did. When oil prices were high, the Soviet leadership could subsidize allies, maintain a giant military machine, and compete with the United States. But when oil prices collapsed in the 1980s, every weakness became harder to hide. Oil did not destroy the Soviet Union by itself, but falling revenues made all existing problems worse. Then the Soviet Union collapsed. In the 1990s, Russia was chaotic and poor, but by the early 2000s, global oil prices rose sharply. This was the great gift that helped build Putin's system. Russia became rich not because it created a diversified economy, but because oil and gas money flooded in. At the same time, Russian society changed. First, Russians became car owners and started building their lives around the car. Second, the movement of goods changed. Russia is still a rail-heavy country, especially for long-distance industrial freight, but the everyday economy has become far more dependent on diesel trucks. So today's Russia is much more vulnerable to fuel disruption than the Soviet Union was. A Soviet citizen without a private car could still take a bus, tram, trolleybus, metro, or commuter train. A modern Russian family in a suburb may not have that option. A Soviet logistics system could push more through state rail plants. A modern mixed economy depends on thousands of trucking routes, private suppliers, regional distributors, and small businesses that cannot function without fuel. This is why Russia's fuel crisis is not only about oil production. Oil in the ground is not gasoline in the tank. Between the Siberian well and the Russian driver, between the refinery and the Russian army, there is a long and fragile chain. Now, let's look at how that machine works. Russia's fuel machine. Russia produces crude oil mainly in Western Siberia, the Volga-Urals region, Eastern Siberia, and the Far East. But crude oil is not fuel yet. It has to travel through pipelines, mostly controlled by the state pipeline monopoly Transneft, to refineries. Only there does it become gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, and other usable products. Then the finished fuel has to move again by pipeline, rail, river, sea, and finally by truck to depots, farms, and gas stations. Russia's major refineries are spread across the country, but many of the most important ones are in the European part of Russia and the Volga-Urals industrial belt. The allocations made sense for the Soviet and post-Soviet economy, close to pipelines, rail links, industrial centers, export routes, and large consumer markets. But refineries have one major weakness. They are huge, fixed, complex targets. You cannot hide a refinery. You cannot move it. And if key refining units are damaged, repairs may require specialized equipment, imported parts, software, engineering expertise, and months of work. This brings us to ownership. The big oil companies dominate much of the chain. Rosneft is the largest player, a major oil producer, refiner, and retailer with thousands of gas stations. Other major companies include Gazpromneft, Lukoil, Tatneft, Surgutneftegaz, and others. Some look private on paper. Some are openly state-controlled. But in Putin's Russia, that distinction is limited. The state controls licenses, export permissions, taxes, and regulations. Nobody in the oil business is truly independent of the Kremlin. The state uses the oil sector as a fiscal machine. Oil and gas revenues have long provided a huge share of the federal budget. So fuel is not just a consumer product. It is part of the bloodstream of the state. The Kremlin wants everything at once. It wants companies to export because exports bring hard currency. It wants them to supply the domestic market because shortages create public anger. It wants fuel prices to stay politically low. It wants taxes. It wants war funding. It wants social stability. These goals contradict each other. When world prices are high, companies prefer exports. When domestic prices are held down, selling fuel inside Russia becomes less profitable. When refineries are damaged, supply tightens. And when wholesale prices rise faster than retail prices, independent gas stations suffer first. A large integrated company can produce crude, refine it, transport it, and sell it through its own network. An independent gas station often buys fuel on the wholesale market and resells it locally. If wholesale prices jump and retail prices cannot follow, that station may simply stop selling. This is why shortages do not spread evenly. One region may look normal, another may introduce limits. A third may have fuel in the morning and empty pumps by evening. Fuel shortages are not only about national production. They are about location, logistics, ownership, and political control. The state can try to manage this crisis. It can restrict exports, pressure producers, adjust subsidies, release reserves, or force more fuel onto the domestic market. But all of these tools assume that the physical machine still works. And this is the new problem. Russia's fuel system was built with war in mind, but for different kind of war. Distance used to protect strategic industry. Refineries far from the border were considered safer. Modern drones changed that. They do not need to occupy territory or defeat an army. They only need to reach a refinery, a fuel depot, a pumping station, or a rail junction. Suddenly, Russia's size becomes not only a strength but a burden. Every refinery, depot, pipeline hub, and loading station needs protection. The Kremlin cannot cover everything. This is the vulnerability inside Russia's fuel machine. Ukraine's refinery war. Ukraine is hitting refineries, depots, pumping stations, ports, transport routes, and the power systems around them. Refineries matter a lot because they are a backbone of the system. Only 13 large refineries handle roughly 2/3 to 3/4 of Russia's total capacity, and they are complex industrial systems that cost a lot to repair. The Moscow refinery is the clearest example. In June 2026, the Moscow oil refinery operated by Gazprom Neft was struck twice by Ukrainian drones. The plant halted operations, unlikely to resume production this year. In 2024, it processed 11.6 million tons of crude oil, the largest fuel supplier for the Moscow region. That matters psychologically too. For years, the war was supposed to stay far away from Moscow. It was supposed to be felt by poor regions, occupied territories, border towns, and families of mobilized men. Then drones reached a refinery serving the capital. I have a dedicated video about why the shock of the first drone attack on Moscow was so huge. Ukraine's fuel disruption campaign works because Russia cannot protect everything. A country that large has too many fixed targets. Air defense cannot cover all of them perfectly every night across thousands of miles. And the drones keep improving. Earlier in the war, Ukraine did not have this kind of deep strike capacity. It had to defend its own cities, and many of the Western weapons it received came with political restrictions. So Ukraine built its own long-range drone industry. It studied Russian air defense, mapped the gaps, and learned how to reach targets that once seemed safely beyond the war zone. The result is what we now see in the news almost every day. The repair trap. A refinery is easy to burn and hard to rebuild. This is part Russian television tries to hide. It can show a governor saying the fire has been extinguished and there's no threat to residents. And sometimes that is true. But a fire being out does not mean the refinery is back to work. A refinery has too many moving parts. If one important link breaks, the whole plant loses capacity. Russia can repair some damage quickly, but deeper damage is different. If a primary refining unit is hit or if several units are damaged together, repairs can take months. By May 2026, about a quarter of Russia's total refining capacity was already out because 16 refineries had fully or partly halted operations. Their share of fuel output was even more painful. Over 30% for gasoline and about a quarter for diesel. That is why repeated strikes matter. They create a shortage of repair teams and spare parts as too many sites start to need them. Sanctions make this worse. For years, Russian refineries were modernized with foreign technology, foreign equipment, and foreign service support. When sophisticated equipment breaks, restoring it requires exact replacements. Under sanctions, that means delays, smuggling routes, lower standards, and ugly improvised substitutions. And there's another trap. If refineries are damaged, Russia may export more crude instead of refined products. But refined products are what the domestic economy needs. The more crude goes abroad, the less of it is left to become the fuel that fills a tractor in Irkutsk, a bus in Crimea, or a truck going toward the front. The regional squeeze. A fuel crisis in Russia affects some regions more than others. The first obvious weak point is Crimea. It is militarized and exposed. It depends on vulnerable routes and supplies from Russia and occupied sovereign Ukraine. In June 2026, Russian-controlled Crimea tightened fuel rationing. Cash sales of gasoline were suspended and new coupons stopped being issued. Drivers stood in lines after Ukrainian strikes restricted supplies. Then there are border and southern regions. Rostov, Belgorod, Kursk, Voronezh, Krasnodar, occupied Donetsk and Lugansk. These are rare areas for the war. A shortage there affects both civilian life and military supply. Moscow is a separate shock. When the Moscow refinery was hit, the problem moved from the edge to the center. Tatarstan gives another kind of warning. Tatneft, one of Russia's important oil producers, imposed fuel sale restrictions at its filling stations. That is striking because Tatarstan is an oil region. Then there is Siberia. Reports from June 2026 said fuel shortages had been officially confirmed in many Siberian regions. Siberia is where Russia's distance problem becomes brutal. If fuel is pulled away towards central Russia, the local consequences can be sharp. The Far East has the same problem in another form. It is far from the center, hard to supply, and often expensive even in normal times. If Moscow begins pulling supply toward politically sensitive regions, remote territories feel the shortage faster. Some people believe the Caucasus to be the last place that feels fuel shortages for that very reason of political sensitivity. And still, Makhachkala recently imposed sale limits. This is another proof that shortages can change quickly. One person posts that everything is normal, but 2 days later, the same city has lines at gas stations, those that don't yet have a handwritten sign saying no gas. The army problem. The Russian army runs on trucks that transport food, ammunition, and other supplies. There are also evacuation vehicles, generators, construction machines, and mobile workshops, all of them using gasoline or diesel. The Kremlin will always try to protect the military first. Fuel for the front will have priority over fuel for private drivers. But that does not remove the shortage. Instead, it pushes the shortage somewhere else, and the consequences will be eventually felt by the military as well. A farmer gets less diesel and must leave crops unharvested. A truck company delays deliveries. Prices rise. People grab as much fuel as they can and store it in garages and balconies because they no longer believe official statements. This panic drives city gas stations even faster. The civilian economy slows down. The state budget receives less money it can spend on war. There's another detail that matters. In this war, the line between military and civilian transport is often blurred. Russian units use civilian-looking trucks. Volunteers and contractors move supplies on civilian vehicles. Fuel may go through civilian infrastructure before it reaches the military system. That means pressure on regular fuel networks can directly affect the war. That doesn't mean a fuel crisis will make the Russian army stop tomorrow morning. Russia is a huge state with reserves, coercion, and the ability to take fuel from one place and send it to another. But the cost of every movement rises. And in a long war, that cost will pile up. The 6 months window. Ukraine's opportunity comes from one fact: refineries are fixed targets. If Ukraine can keep striking refineries, depots, ports, power stations, and transport nodes for several more months, Russia's problem becomes cumulative. There will be too much stress for the system to absorb. Instead of solving a shortage, it will be choosing who suffers it first and who a bit later. The tools are already visible. Russia is restricting exports and lowering fuel quality standards. It is importing gasoline from Belarus and considers buying more from Kazakhstan or India. It can also move fuel from Siberia or the Far East toward politically sensitive regions. But every tool has a limit. Belarus and Kazakhstan have their own markets and obligations. Seaborne imports are expensive and awkward for a country that is supposed to be an oil superpower. Export bans protect domestic supply, but cut into revenue and annoy companies. Pulling fuel from distant regions helps one place and hurts another. This is why the phrase "Russia will just buy fuel abroad" sounds much easier than it is. Buy from whom? How much? At what price? How will it be delivered? And will it arrive where the shortage actually is? Some Ukrainian experts believe that the next 6 months of sustained attacks on Russia's fuel machine can break it down completely. That pressure can push Russia toward freezing the front line and bring the long-awaited peace closer. However, even the end of war will not resolve Russia's deeper problems. Sanctions will not disappear quickly, and damaged refineries will not repair themselves. Before you go, I want to ask you something personal. If fuel ran out in your region, what would you do? And how would it affect your life? Please share your answer in the comments. If this video helped you understand how an oil superpower can run short on fuel, please like, subscribe, and share it with one person who still thinks Russia can absorb every strike without serious consequences. And if you want to support this channel directly, you can join my think tank, leave us super thanks, support through PayPal, or tap Hype Points to help this episode travel further. For those listening on Spotify, follow the show so you don't miss the next one. Thank you for watching. See you next time.